Here we are again, Connors.
Oh, Sarah Gilligan, how are you?
People are going to get used to us calling each other by our full names, full title.
Yes, yes, full title always,
Always,
always.
always, just in case. Can't mix this up with
Yeah.
anybody else.
Mm-mm.
Um, and how are you today? Again,
I'm fantastic.
okay, great.
Fantastic.
All
Feeling
right,
good today, Sarah Gilligan.
good.
Ready to speak a bit about love addiction.
Yes, let's do that. That's a great idea. Shall we talk about what exactly is love addiction?
What
Let's
exactly is? Yeah.
clarify some things about love addiction. What makes it different to regular love? Maybe what makes it
Mm-hmm.
different from codependency?
Mm, yes.
Maybe
All
what
of
are
these
the
wonderful questions.
some of the signs and symptoms of it?
Oh, all the wonderful signs and symptoms of love addiction. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I'm sure there's people out there now going, a podcast on love addiction. What exactly the hell is this thing?
yeah.
Yeah. And how the hell do I know that I have it? Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody was to ask me, sorry for interrupting you before you were just about to take a breath
Yeah.
and launch into
Yeah.
something, and I completely cut you off.
Yeah. You're grand.
If somebody was to ask, how would you describe, like, why would you invite somebody to listen to this podcast? If you
Mm,
really, if you saw a friend, a coworker,
mm,
family member doing something, saying something, acting a certain way, what would you
mm,
look for and go, you might, it might be really helpful for you to tune in and listen to RecoverZing.
That's a brilliant way to position it. That's fantastic. Yes, that's
Right?
exactly right. Yeah.
Anyways, off you go.
And that's it. And that's it. Okay. Well, love addiction, terrifyingly,
Brace yourselves.
like we spoke about in the podcast earlier, is, it's just the biggest addiction hiding in plain sight.
Mm.
So, unlike other addictions that we know of that are very visible in our society, like alcohol and drugs and blah, and all of it, gambling, sex, blah, all very overt and visible addictions. Like somebody is really getting into messy territory in their lives. They're repeatedly doing a behavior that is really causing them huge pain and strife, and their loved ones pain and strife to the most part, and it's getting dangerously out of control. These are very obvious, visible signs of active addiction that are pretty easy to spot. The thing about love addiction is a whole lot of the signs and symptoms of active love addiction are usually couched in our general society as kind of just being generalized states of regular old love, so, and they're almost lauded or applauded in society to the most part. So, things like, which we in addiction terms call obsessional love, for example, which is one of the key symptoms of love addiction, which is where you literally lock on to an object of your desire and you can't get that person out of your head. So you wake up with that person in your head, you go to bed with that person hanging in your head. You're constantly obsessing about them, constantly thinking about them, constantly wanting to be near them, constantly want to be in contact with them, otherwise known as obsession. Yeah. But we very rarely hear that word obsession, which is a key symptom of love addiction. We rarely hear the word obsession spoken about in general parlance. We just don't hear it.
Yeah.
Obsession is usually relegated to really extreme levels of like psychiatry,
Oh,
you
totally.
know?
Unless you're watching a program on Netflix on stalkers.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like, wow, obsessional love will bring you off down these corridors of actual active agony and probably end you up in the penitentiary.
Yeah.
So nobody talks about regular, just bog old standard love addiction obsession, which is silently and in extreme agony daily, on a daily basis, waking up with the person in your head, going to bed with that same person in your head, and never being able to move that person out of your head.
Mm. Oof.
And all the while going about your regular life, meeting up with friends, having a coffee, going to work, working your like whatever, 12 hours at work, whatever the hell you're doing, having your pets, having your family, having all of it. But nobody knows all the while that this person is hanging in your head and you're doing absolutely everything in your power to try and get near them, be in contact with them. If you're in a relationship with them, constantly in contact with them.
Mm-hmm. Terrifying.
So, yeah. So that's one of the key symptoms of love addiction. So it's kind of like, and I'm sure there are people listening going, but sure, I do that. Doesn't everybody do that in like early love? Isn't that just part of being in
Yeah,
love?
yeah.
Yeah. Being in love means you think about the other person. But love addiction is when all the states of regular love are brought to the extreme nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like everything that regular love is, multiply that by about 10,000, and then you're moving into the territory of love
Love
addiction.
addiction. And just to be very, to reiterate that, and I think that's a great description, it's chilling to the bone, obviously, when I'm thinking, obviously when I'm thinking about it. And it also at simultaneously I have a Kylie Minogue song playing in my head, can't get you out of my like again, may need to be edited out, aka get the lawyers in. But it totally brings a different kind of tone to that song. But there is a very real, when you're talking about it being 10,000 more times more strong than regular bog standard being in love. And I feel like I want to reiterate, you don't have to be acting out in a really crazy way for this to be happening. It's really, some of love addiction is very much tracked on the inside. How much
Mm-hmm.
time on the inside of your mind are you spending thinking about this particular person in your
Mm-hmm.
day? And I have definitely heard that it's not necessarily a question that's often asked, I think, in therapeutic places, but it's absolutely something that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just non-stop, getting a coffee, thinking about the person, walking to the bus, thinking about the person, opening your eyes in the morning, thinking about the person, like consistently constant. It's a real
Yep.
thing. And you don't have to be, uh, you know, flailing around on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
The general, maybe generally speaking, you don't even know that this is happening for another
Mm-hmm.
person.
Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely.
Anyways.
And yeah, and that is a key symptom. There are many, many symptoms of love addiction, which we'll go through,
Mm,
but that is what a really key one. Also, I suppose another key symptom, which kind of, you know, to the most part, kind of separates love from love addiction. Another key one is an inability to leave a relationship that isn't working.
mm,
So a love addict will stay in a relationship no matter what is going on, just to be in proximal contact with the person that their love addiction is pointed toward.
mm,
So it doesn't matter what writing is on the wall. It doesn't matter how desperate the situation has become or how absolutely non-life sustaining the relationship has dissolved into.
mhm.
A love addict in love addiction, their ability to leave a despairing love relationship is zero. They
Zero.
cannot leave. They will stay in that love addicted relationship until literally until something dies. Either the relationship dies, they die, blah. They just do not have the ability to leave.
Mm,
And, so that makes sense of like lots of, in society, we see that a lot. It's like, what is she doing back with that guy again?
mhm.
What is he doing with that woman that is just like treating him like crap, sleeping with everybody? I know him really well. He's a really decent guy. What
He's a
in
great
God's name
dad.
is going
Oh,
on?
yeah,
He's a great dad. He's fabulous. He's so sweet. What is he doing staying in that relationship that is so not serving him? What is she doing? A different relationship. We can't understand why a person would stay in a relationship that's so devastatingly destructive.
yeah. Hmm.
One or both people, and we're on the outside looking in and we're watching this happening. We can't understand it.
Mm,
Usually in relationships like that, there is addictive relating going on.
hmm.
So it's not like there's choice involved anymore. There's no choice to leave.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something really important. That's almost like back to that question of the difference between codependence and love addiction, whereas one you probably can leave. If you can identify as a codependent, you
Yeah.
probably have the capacity to make a somewhat of a decision to leave something that isn't working.
Yeah.
In love addiction, there is zero capacity to leave
Yeah.
any setup.
Yeah. So codependent, we'll go into that in depth, in a
Yeah,
later podcast, the differences between codependency and love addiction. They can be very similar. They can look identical. But like you say, Sarah, the usually in codependency, the way that codependency is usually kind of the key things we know about codependency is usually like arrested childhood development states. So often people can't leave relationships because they've been catapulted into like more childlike states of their development and just don't have the wherewithal to leave,
totally.
which is different to love addiction, where the person is, to the most part, in their adult self, but are fully addicted, i.e., they are utterly powerless to make conscious, self affirming, life affirming choices about their own health and their own safety and their own happiness.
Mm.
So they're similar and they can look very similar, but they're quite different in their presentation, even if they look very similar. Also, another key point of love addiction versus codependency is if codependents leave a relationship, they'll suffer, they'll be really, you know, devastated, crying in bits, the usual breakup of a relationship.
Mm.
But the thing that separates codependency from love addiction is a codependent, usually to the most part, will not go into a state of withdrawal.
Yeah.
Whereas a love addict, exactly like for a drug addict coming off drugs, exactly for an alcoholic, a heavy drinking alcoholic coming off drink, for a love addict coming off love,
Mm.
immediately drop into a withdrawal state. So
Absolutely.
that's usually
Yeah.
how we see the
And I
addiction.
think that's a very key when I was about to ask about that one. Even if it's not a breakup of a relationship, a love addict can go into various forms of a withdrawal depending on where the partner is. Like if there's a distance, if there's a fight, if there is somebody has left for him, whatever it is, a withdrawal state will come in pretty fast as the
Mm-hmm.
object of the addiction has left the building on in a sense, whether that could be going on a trip or going to do work things or whatever it might be. Withdrawal states can happen very quickly, whereas it doesn't really happen in the same way
Mm-hmm.
with regular folk and
Mm-hmm.
codependence. It just doesn't. You don't have those states, those really extreme emotional states that sometimes you can't really put any. You don't really understand what's happening for the most part.
Absolutely. And here's another interesting part about that. And that'll be another entire podcast, of course, and many of them around withdrawal. But a lot of the time, when people are in the active love addiction, you know, they haven't an iota what withdrawal is. They just think they're like dropping into states of exhaustion, or they want to take to the bed, or they've no language around withdrawal. They don't understand what that term means. So they're putting it through a lens of I'm exhausted, I've been working too hard, or I need to take more vitamins because I haven't been. I'm obviously feeling unwell, or I need to go to my doctor because I have this chronic exhaustion for the last 2 weeks because my partner is off traveling in whatever, and I haven't had enough regular contact. So people in active love addiction that don't even have the language or the understanding of what's going on, they'll put it through a framework of something else.
Mm.
So they won't even have the language for it.
Mm. There's very particular. There's many other signs and symptoms, but they're some of the biggest ones.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I think
mm-hmm,
on a day-to-day level, when you have people in your life sometimes that will consistently maybe bring a conversation back to a person over and over again or route conversations through what the other person did or whatever. I think that's always like a very subtle sign that something might be going on in terms
mm,
of, you know, I guess on a day-to-day symptom and sign, that to me is a really big one. I hear people in a therapeutic setting, you could be asking them, honestly, you could be asking them about the weather, and
mm,
somehow this person will get rooted into all of these areas, questions, whatever, you'll just hear a name coming in quite frequently, even though you don't really know
Mm.
where this person is in relation to them. And I think it's another version of that obsessional piece that can arrive in. So
Mm-hmm.
there's like the system, even though that you might not be physically around them, your internal system wants to keep bringing the person back in, making them
Mm-hmm.
alive in your day to day,
Mm-hmm.
even though they might
Mm-hmm.
not be. So it's always a kind of a big one to listen for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's it. That's really they're the key big ones. I mean,
Yeah.
two of the big obvious parts of love addiction that are really the most evident, I guess, if we're looking for it in ourselves or in people around us.
Mm, it's not pleasant.
It's not pleasant. And if you've got it, dear God, get help with it because it doesn't go away, it doesn't treat itself.
No,
It just gets more hobbling, more devastating, more dysfunctional, more addictive as time goes on.
it doesn't go away. And it's like and I think that's something that needs to be said over and over again. It's like any addiction, whether it's chemical addiction or otherwise, it does not correct itself. The
Mm-mm.
root of an addiction is always to go to the end point, which is
Mm.
death on some level, or the removal of whatever part of you, physical, spiritual, whatever it is. That's the end point of an addiction. That's its modus operandi. And I
Mm.
think it's really important to know that love addiction is exactly the same, even though, like you said, popular culture has songs really steeped in the language of love addiction. So we sing along to it every day, or we watch TV programs about it every other day, and we have normalized certain things, behaviors, Instagram, whatever it might be, wherever we're getting our kind of social media fixes, all of those things. But if
Mm-hmm.
you even have an inclination that you think you might have it, it's probably worth checking it out so that
God, yeah.
you can make the decision between, oh, maybe it's not that, maybe I do have codependency, or maybe I just have some issues with the person I'm dating, whatever it might be. But
Mm-hmm.
even if you want to pass this podcast off to your neighbor because you think they have it, just sit and listen to it again yourself, just in case it is you that might need to listen to it, because it's a real. And we've had this conversation before. It doesn't come across as the most shiny, kind of hot, sexy addiction at all. And it's
Mm.
steeped in a lot of shame. So a lot of people don't want to really sit with it and go, oh God, this is a part of who I am, or this is an addiction I have. So there's a real want to just sweep it under the carpet and hope
Oh
that it'll
God,
get
yeah.
better. If you love more, if you do this more, it'll go get, and it's not. It's not the answer, and
Yeah.
it won't work.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
You know,
That's it. Yeah.
which it's good to know there is a route out of it.
There's 100% a route out of it. And I mean, if you're in it, and I hope to God if there's people all around the States, all around the world that have love addiction and it pops up in your search engine or you see this podcast, that is without a shadow of a doubt the most important message of this podcast is that it is 100% treatable. It is fully treatable. You can fully recover, but you have to know what you're recovering from and you have to understand what you're recovering from.
Yeah,
And that's the whole purpose we want to talk about it here.
yeah. And we'll go into depth about that kind of how do we know what we're trying to recover from, really.
Mm-hmm.
That leads me to, I feel like
Mm.
we need to put in a jingle here. Da, da, da. Desperate questions.
Desperate Hell.
Desperate
The
questions
desperate question.
corner. Here we
Desperate
are. We love
question.
this. Desperate questions or questions of
Mhm.
desperation. It could be either, but desperate
Yes.
questions being, just to very quickly tell everybody again, desperate questions being questions that I know, I've heard, you've heard, many people ask for me, clients, heard in the rooms, whatever, people asking questions. They seem so simple and
Hmm.
yet so terrifyingly unanswerable when you're in love addiction or in early recovery in love addiction. So the
Hmm.
desperate question for today is,
Mm.
ready? This is
Hmm.
one that comes up a lot. When I am feeling, I'm just going to use the word when I am feeling good about what's happening in the relationship, why is it that my brain goes into absolute panic that something awful is about? to happen or change.
Mm.
Happens
Mm-hmm.
quite
Mm-hmm.
frequently. I hear it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, for a number of reasons. I mean, that happens. That's kind of like a hallmark as well of early recovery. I would say early recovery. When I say early recovery, I usually mean the first couple of years of love addiction
Yeah.
recovery. So I think the biggest reason, there's two main component reasons for it. Of course, all addiction is coming from, we hear the words childhood trauma bandied around a lot, right? Childhood trauma. But to the most part, the reason that we are in the midst of an addiction is because we didn't come from the most incredibly fabulous, life affirming homes. That's just to the most part across the board for people in addiction. But love addiction, particularly, is particularly usually about abandonment and neglect. It can be about other things, but they are the huge two childhood parts of childhood trauma associated with love addiction. So, abandonment and neglect. There can also be engulfment. We can go into that later. But so, abandonment and neglect in for a love addict in their childhood of origin, so their actual original caregiving family of origin, was typified by ongoing abandonment. So a love addict in their adult body, currently in a relationship right now, until they get a fair way into their love addiction recovery, they're still getting triggered and, let's say, traumatized light, which is just like a horrible oxymoronic thing to even mention, but it's almost like a constant kind of little daily feed of trauma that goes on to the most part. And it's kind of like the aftershock of that original traumatic actual childhood that happened, which to the most part is usually forgotten and is often somaticized in the body, but we often don't have memories of that neglect in our childhood, but we know what happened. But the vestiges of that are still very apparent in our current relationship today. So, any little triggers of any perceived abandonment can send those shock waves through the body and set up that kind of catastrophic thinking that we know is the shoe's about to drop, the axe is about to fall, something's going to go wrong. That kind of catastrophic thinking, because to the most part, that balancing system of recovery and love addiction, it's still kind of going like this. It takes a long time for that to kind of settle down,
Mm.
until it becomes something that becomes quite steady. So in early recovery, when I say early recovery, I usually say like the first 2 years, we're still usually in this kind of system.
Mm.
So we're still kind of thinking, oh, it's good today, but you can be damn sure that crap's going to come down the pike because that's what we would have lived with originally,
Yeah.
because abandonment for a child in a childhood home is not necessarily about crap happening, but just this long malingering absence of care, love, and constancy.
Yeah.
So, but that does set up traumatic shockwaves in the body, and it's experienced like this.
Hmm.
So, if things are good, we're expecting it to not be good.
Hmm.
And we don't ever realize that as we go along and we get more and more, claw more of our recovery back, that this actually does start to calm down the more we gather ourselves in our own life.
Mm.
And eventually it starts to become like this.
Mm.
So we might still feel like, oh, something's going to happen, but then it isn't really. And then we start to trust a little bit more. And then we start to see, oh, hang on a minute. I'm getting more and more days where I'm not swinging in and out of this kind of like fear system.
Fear system. Yeah, that's how I would say that also. Very good. Yeah. It's interesting when I think about that question in relation to responses, like you said, that teeter totter of up, down, up, down, up, down, where the responses are maybe in recovery when you've stepped on the path of recovery and you've got a little bit of recovery. You have maybe now the capacity to name what's happening, to maybe name to a person that you're having these up and downs. You're not sure. You have the question posed, why is it that I keep wobbling out thinking something terrible is going to happen? And it's not based on non-reality. It's based on an internal
Mm.
system that's been in place probably your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to listen to it. And in recovery, then we listen to that and then do the things necessary to start stabilizing on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really good to hear that even though those little wobbles may still happen and there's a reason why they're
Mm-hmm.
happening, and with the right people, actions, you know what you're doing, you know you can ask people what you need to do, you can start to stabilize that also and really test it. It's like testing something out constantly. It's like, is that thinking correct at the moment? Like it might actually be a trauma response to something, but maybe the entirety of what it's telling you is not true.
Mm-hmm.
There's component parts are happening. So it's really, really helpful to hear that, because I do know that I have heard that question in many different ways for a long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of it's tricky, right, to hear that, like, why when you start in a chemical recovery, you put the substance down and you just continue a day at a time keeping the substance down, right? So it seems very,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of that, your life will improve.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, when we talk about a process addiction like love addiction, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always map the same way, because you really have to know that there's a few different component parts happening. Yes, your life will get better,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few more wobbles in there because it's a different type of an addiction to a chemical addiction, and you need to be
Mm-hmm.
process it slightly differently,
Yeah,
which is
that's
good to
exactly
know.
right.
you know
Yeah.
it's great,
Yeah.
helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Desperate questions with answers.
Desperate questions. Desperate questions with answers. Yes, indeed.
Some
And
answers.
P.S. If you do, if anybody does have desperate questions, please send them in. I mean, we won't be able to answer them all, of course, but we will log them if we do get like desperate
Super.
questions sent in. We'll answer as many as we can over the times.
Oh, and I think we've had a laugh about this so many times. Feel like there's been many questions. You imagine that nobody either wants to know the answer to this question or wants to ask the question because they don't need to. But in reality, probably hundreds and thousands of people want to know that question, the answer to the question that you want to ask.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we simply don't talk about this thing
Mm-hmm.
in society.
Mm-hmm.
So all
Mm-hmm.
questions are welcome,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. So yeah, that's very, very helpful. It's a little bit around what exactly is love addiction, and a
Mm-hmm.
question answered somewhat.
Mm.
Zing.
Great. Zing, Sarah Gilligan. Zing, zing, zing.
Okay, well, we will finish on that note, and we will be back with another installation very soon.
Yeah, we will.